He loved making up all of these big stories which would portray him as a hero, which really didn't help when he tried defending himself on the charge of murdering his baby Geraldine. Timothy John Evans, he was born on 20th of November 1924 in Glamorgan, Wales. In April 1924, just before Timothy was born, his father Daniel actually abandoned the family. However, later on, Timothy, he did see his own dad as a hero. So I'm not sure if Timothy knew that his dad abandoned them, the whole family, but we know that he did see his own father as a hero. Timothy also had an older sister, Eileen, who was born in 1921, and a younger half-sister, Maureen, who was born in September 1929. Timothy's mom, she remarried later in September 1933. As a child, Timothy, he was really struggling to learn how to speak, and he had a really hard time at school. He had some learning difficulties, and when Timothy was 8 years old, he had an accident, and because of this accident, he developed tubercular verruca on his right foot, which never fully healed. Because of this, he missed a lot of school for all kinds of treatments, which is safe to say that it kind of further affected his education even more. He was slow to walk, he was slow to talk, he was slow to read, and he was slow to write. By the time that he was 13 years old, when he left school, he only knew just about how to write his name. So by the time Timothy was an adult, he had very low literacy skills, often needing others to read long documents to him. But he could, however, read simple phrases or sentences like, for example, comics or newspaper football reports, his wages and receipts. As an adult, Timothy, he liked boxing and football, and he supported Queen's Park Rangers. Just the same as, guess who? I'll give you a second there. His neighbor, John. And like I briefly mentioned before, Timothy, he liked to come up with these wild, sensational stories just to kind of boost his self-esteem. Something which actually carried on into his adulthood. So it was hard for him later to be credible to police and also to the courts. In 1935, when Timothy was just 11 years old, his mother and her second husband, they moved to London. Timothy attended school there, but he also worked as a painter and a decorator. He went back to his hometown of Matatidville, I have no idea how to pronounce it, in 1937. So when he was When he was like 13 years old, he went back from London to his hometown. And in his hometown, he actually ended up working in the coal mines, but he had to quit his job because of the constant problems that he was having with his foot. Remember the verruca? So just 2 years later, in 1939, he went back to London to live again with his mom, and in 1946, they moved to St. Mark's Road, Notting Hill. I mean, I think it's kind of safe to say that Timothy's childhood wasn't exactly easy. And, it was also the 1930s and so on, with the end of the war and all the, picking up the pieces from the end of the war. But Timothy, he was working when he was 11 years old. Then he went back to his hometown on his own. He was completely alone. He was also working in the coal mines. And, he was just a kid. I mean, this is kind of messed up, right? On top of that, he also had these problems with his foot. So I'm sure that Timothy, he wasn't feeling the best. This must have taken some kind of toll on him. He was just a kid, so, as a kid, how many things do you need to deal with, right? So, in London, the place that the family moved to was just over 2 minutes walk from 10 Rillington Place, his future home, after Timothy married. When Timothy was 22 years old, on 25th of April 1946, he was fined 60 shillings at West London Magistrates Court for stealing a car and driving the car without insurance or a license. Now, those 60 shillings, they would be around £400 in today's money. So my guess is that It was quite a lot of money in those times. The following year, on 20th of September 1947, Timothy, he married Beryl Susanna Thorley. They had met in 1947 on a blind date. At first, they lived with Timothy's family at St. Mark's Road, but after Beryl found out that she was pregnant in 1948, they moved into the top floor flat at 10 Rillington Place in the Ladbroke Grove area of Notting Hill. The neighbors living under them in the ground floor flat were John Christie, who at the time was working as a post office clerk, and his wife Ethel Christie. Geraldine, Timothy's and Beryl's daughter, she was born on 10th of October 1948. By all accounts, Timothy's and Beryl's marriage, it wasn't the best, it wasn't a great one. Beryl was young, she was barely 18 years old when she married him in 1947. Then a year later, she gave birth to Geraldine. Timothy, he was illiterate, he had a chronic foot infection, which meant, as a 24-year-old, that he walked with a limp and had no real education, but he did have a job delivering produce around London to provide for his wife and their daughter. They lived in the tiny flat at 10 Rillington Place, but the Notting Hill neighborhood is not like you would know it today. It was just the stuff of nightmares back then, honestly. The area had been heavily bombed during the Blitz and still showed wounds for years after the war. Their street was populated by rows of brick buildings that in the previous century, these buildings, they were quite nice because these were single family residences, but they were now cut up into cheap multiple unit dwellings. 10 Rillington Place was divided into 3 flats. Timothy, Beryl, and Geraldine, they lived in the top unit. An elderly man who was in the hospital at the time lived just below them, and the middle-aged married couple and long-term tenants were in the ground floor flat. And these were John Christie and his wife. Each unit had only 2 rooms and they all shared the interior stairways and hallways. There was no indoor plumbing and all of the residents would share a wash house in the small backyard, which had a sink and copper for heating water with an outdoor toilet beside it. The flats were illuminated by coal gas fed into the units by jets in the wall. So, I mean, you can kind of say that it wasn't the best situation or these were not the best living conditions, but I guess that after the war, it was kind of like a good place to live in, right? After everything that happened. Timothy and Beryl, they fought often about money, of which they had very little. They were also behind on rent and on the payments for their rent to own furniture. It was also said that Beryl, she was a poor housekeeper, whatever that means. I assume that maybe in maintaining and cleaning the household, making dinners and such. But it seems that she wasn't really good with managing the finances either. At the same time, Timothy spent his wages on alcohol. He was a heavy drinker and this made his short temper even worse. It just seemed that Beryl wasn't up to the values of Timothy and his family. They would argue so loudly that they could be heard by their neighbors, even witnessing physical violence on several occasions. However, in 1949, Beryl found out that she was pregnant again and she told Timothy, but because they were already struggling financially, she decided that the best option would be to get an abortion. Even though Timothy didn't really like this idea, he eventually gave in. On November 14th, Timothy was back in Wales, staying with relatives who were not very happy with him. He did exactly what his own dad did to him, abandon his wife and their baby. At the same time, Thomasina was fed up with her son Timothy. For weeks, she didn't hear from her daughter-in-law Beryl, who was very unusual because she would normally be in regular contact with her in-laws. At first, Timothy said that Beryl and their baby, they left London to visit Beryl's father in Brighton. But then Thomasina found out that Timothy, he also left London, returning to his hometown in Wales, where he was staying with his aunt and uncle. Before Timothy left London, he quit his job and he sold off all of the couple's furniture. And when Thomasina heard this, she was just furious. She was fuming. So, on November 29th, 1949, she sent a letter to her sister-in-law in Wales saying, quote, I don't know what lies Tim have told you down there. I have not seen Beryl or the baby for a month. There is some mystery about him. I never want to see him as long as I live. Everywhere I go, people asking for him, for money he owes them. I am ashamed to say that he is my son. End of quote. When Thomasina's letter arrived the following day, Timothy's aunt read it to him at breakfast. That same afternoon, on November 30th, 1949, Timothy left his aunt and uncle's house and he walked into the local police station. He told the detective on duty, I have disposed of my wife. When the detective asked him what he meant, Timothy replied, I have put her down the drain. Timothy said that his wife died in unusual circumstances and he was worried for the safety of his 18-month-old baby, Geraldine. Police asked him where Beryl was, and Timothy told them that she was dead. When he was questioned further, he said that Beryl, she was pregnant, and the man gave him some kind of liquid which would induce an abortion, which Beryl drank, then she died. Timothy went on claiming that he stuffed his wife's body down a manhole outside the house where they lived. He was going to return to his hometown after arranging for his baby Geraldine to be looked after by someone else, and he also sold the furniture from their flat for £40. By this point, Timothy was only 25 years old. For 2 days, he was detained in the cells at the local police station in isolation, while police in Notting Hill, they did a search of number 10 Rillington Place.